Sorry, I was just testing out my new Cleveland Browns hat. The Browns are terrible. And I'm just going to sit here and rant about why they're so bad, how they're so bad, what's going wrong, because we're just an embarrassment. The embarrassment of the NFL, once again. We're supposed to be good, just not. And yeah, it's been horrible. Browns are 1-4. I am recording this pretty much just after the absolute embarrassment by the Washington Commanders. Now the Commanders, they're a great team. They've been really good this year. Jaden Daniels is doing a lot of special things. He seems to be the real deal. I don't think he's going to slow down. He hasn't showed any signs of slowing down. But it's unacceptable to play how the Browns played today in Washington. And a lot of people are going to come and tell you, oh, it's Deshaun Watson. While yes, Deshaun Watson is terrible, like, don't get me wrong, he's really bad. Everybody around Deshaun Watson is also horrible. I promise you, it's not just Deshaun Watson. He's terrible, but everyone else is too. And if you ask me, it all starts at the top. So I'll just start at the top. Andrew Berry, the general manager of this football team, while he has done good things, like bringing in players for pretty cheap, like Amari Cooper and stuff like that, he made possibly the worst deal in the history of football, maybe. The Deshaun Watson trade obviously is just not panning out. It's terrible. Gave up 3 first-round picks. We paid him $270 million of guaranteed money to be not below average, to be bad. He's actively terrible. He's on par with Bryce Young. It's been horrid. And look, last year he wasn't good, but he played good enough for the defense to win games. That's not the case this year. It's definitely the worst trade in the past 20, 25 years. It's just really horrible. And while he has done a good job building other parts of this team, at some point, Andrew Berry has to pay the price for making that terrible of a move and derailing your franchise like this. And yeah, you're going to say, well, the Browns made the playoffs last year. No thanks to Deshaun Watson. So every time Deshaun Watson is on the field, the Browns seem to not succeed. Whether it's his fault, whether it's the offensive line's fault, whether it's the receiver's fault, when Deshaun Watson plays, the Browns do not play well. Plain and simple. And at some point, that has to not be on Deshaun Watson anymore. We have to accept the fact that he's not good, and it has to be on the guy who gave up everything to bring him here. Plain and simple. It has to be on Andrew Berry. Andrew Berry's also done a terrible, terrible job bringing in depth at key positions. The offensive line is terrible, and there's no depth because Andrew Berry didn't get any. Last year, no depth at quarterback. This year, there's depth at quarterback, except your quarterback's healthy, and you're not going to sit him because he sucks, because you pay him so much money that he has to play, because if he doesn't play, then you look like an even bigger idiot. It's horrible. Every way around it, it's horrible. Andrew Berry, I love him. He's done great things for this Cleveland team. He's got to go. I don't care. At the end of the year, Andrew Berry needs to get fired because there is no reason that the team he's marching out there on Sundays right now should be as bad as they have been. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Next up, Coach Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski has won 2 Coach of the Years with the Cleveland Browns. Both years he took them to the playoffs. It's another thing where I love Kevin Stefanski. He's done a great job with this football team in making this football team a at least competitive team. Because when he took a hold of it, they were not, and they hadn't been in a long time. But when you look at last year, him winning Coach of the Year, did he really deserve Coach of the Year? Maybe. I think it should have been either him or D'Amico Ryans, whatever. You had a horrible Nick Chubb injury that the team absolutely rallied behind, and then the team was riddled with injuries throughout the entire rest of the year. And sometimes guys just rally behind that. Next man up approach, all that kind of stuff. He had a hold of that locker room. He does not have a hold of the locker room right now. One of the biggest reasons he can't get a hold of the locker room is because he's calling plays. And I don't think it's a bad idea to have your coach call plays. I think you should generally have your offensive coordinator do it. That's just my opinion. But it would be one thing if Kevin Stefanski was a play calling wizard and was just so good at it, and it was a perfect reason for him to keep calling plays, except he's terrible. He's the worst play caller in the NFL, bar none. His plays are terrible. Well, actually, maybe not bar none. Nathaniel Hackett is a really bad play caller. But Kevin Stefanski is his arch rival when it comes to play calling because it's horrible. It's unwatchable. The runs we call, it's just run it up the middle, 2nd and 10, run it up the middle, 3rd and 5, run it up the middle. It's horrible. You create no time for Deshaun Watson with the offensive line. You don't do anything schematically right with pulling guards, pulling tackles, giving Deshaun time. You just throw people out there and tell them to block and run a route, and you expect everything to work. There's nothing. There's nothing to his play calls. It's atrocious. And while he's calling these terrible plays, he has no hold of the locker room. Nobody wants to win. Nobody cares about winning. You have trade talks about Amari Cooper in the offseason that obviously bothered him. And obviously, nothing has been done to salvage that relationship between you and Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is very frustrated in Cleveland. It's very obvious. And I think he's going to be gone by the deadline. I think a lot of players are going to be gone by the deadline. You're 1-4. And another thing, too, is the Bengals. The Bengals just went to 1-4. And that is extremely disappointing for the Bengals, for Cincinnati fans. I understand you're in the same boat as Cleveland. However, the Bengals have been competitive. Joe Burrow has been good. Their defense, while is giving up a lot of points, at least turns the ball over. That team has been competitive and good enough to play with their opponents. The Browns are getting killed. The Browns are putting up 10 points against the New York Giants. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was more. You can't score against the Raiders. Can't score against the Giants, like I said. You're barely beating the Jaguars. You're getting embarrassed at home by the Cowboys. You're putting up, 13 points, which really, I'll say 6 because the touchdown was garbage time. So you're putting up 6 points against a Washington defense that is giving up 26 points a game this year. It's a joke. While the Bengals are competitive with the Chiefs, going to overtime with the Ravens, at least they're playing with these teams. They're getting unlucky. They're not coming out of these games with wins. I get that in the win column, the Bengals look the same as the Browns, but I assure you, the Browns are a much worse football team than the Cincinnati Bengals. It's not even close. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, Kevin Stefanski needs to go. It's hard to say. He's been so good. He's won 2 Coach of the Years with the Browns. He either needs to stop calling plays and get a hold of that locker room, or he needs to end his time in Cleveland because, quite frankly, throughout his whole time in Cleveland, he's never been a good play caller. He really has never been a great coach. He's just had teams that have rallied behind situations to make the playoffs and then been eliminated from the playoffs quite quickly. He's just not the coach for Cleveland, in my opinion. I think they need to move on. I think they need to start a rebuild because as sad as it is, as competitive as this team could have been, they could have been a Super Bowl contender. They could have done all of these things. This team's not working out, and I think you need to blow up the front office. When you blow up the front office, I think you need to move on from some key pieces that you thought were franchise players, but evidently they're not. Now we could talk about Deshaun Watson. I know I've talked about him a bit. He's really bad. He looked phenomenal against the Raiders when nobody else did. And so maybe you're thinking, at least that's a step in the right direction. Maybe Deshaun's going to come out and play. And then he shows up in this Washington game and forgets how to play football. It makes no sense. The whole Deshaun Rust stuff is just, you can't even, there's nothing to talk about anymore. He's played enough games where the rust is gone. He's obviously a terrible person off the field. That's not even bringing up anything. But he's also horrible on the football field, and he's getting paid way too much money to do a job that Jameis Winston could be doing probably 3 times better, plain and simple. And it's just embarrassing. As a Browns fan, as someone who loves Cleveland and loves football, it's embarrassing that not only do we have to march out someone who is so awful, like just a bad person, but also someone who is just terrible at what they do, getting paid millions and millions and millions of guaranteed money. It's just, It's embarrassing. You know, a lot of people too are probably going to be talking about how the defense has been disappointing. While I do agree, it has been definitely worse than last year. No doubt they are the best defense in football last year. It's hard to expect that from them again. I don't think people thought it was going to be this bad. But at the end of the day, when your offense is never on the field because, like, for example, today, horrible on first and second down, and because of that, you go 0 for 12, I think, on third down. You're punting the whole time. You're turning the ball over. You're punting. You're kicking field goals. When your defense is always on the field because your offense can't stay on the field, it's going to be a lot harder for those guys to stay in the game and not give up those big plays like the big Jane Daniels runs or like a big deep pass on the field. It becomes really difficult for that to happen, especially when you play in a Jim Schwartz defense that is very dependent on man coverage. And when you have these corners in man to man every play over and over and over, it becomes impossible for you to ask them to keep up with the receivers because these guys are gassed and because they've been on the field for so long, and defense is just hard to do and at a high level. And when you are on the field constantly, you're going to give up scores. And that's, again, on the offense. For the offense never being on the field, and the offense never being on the field is on Kevin Stefanski because he's in charge of that offense. And you brought in Ken Dorsey for what? You bring in Ken Dorsey to not call plays? I don't get it. Now, while I don't think Ken Dorsey's play calling would save this team, that's not what I'm saying. Why is he here? He's like a quarterbacks coach, but your offensive coordinator. And if you brought him here to be a quarterbacks coach, well, obviously he's not doing a good job because Deshaun still sucks. So what's the point of that signing? And then I guess the last coach you could talk about is Jim Schwartz. Now, Jim Schwartz is a great defensive coach, but his scheme is hard. And you're asking a lot of people to do a lot of really tough things, like how they cover in man, and it's hard to do when you're on the field so often. My problem with Jim Schwartz this year is that guys aren't tackling, and that just goes down to coaching because these guys aren't trying hard enough. They're not ready to play on Sunday, and they're not tackling, which they were last year, and it's embarrassing when your team can't tackle and you're giving up chunks of yards because guys are just breaking tackle after tackle. Your corners can't tackle, which I get it, you're a corner, but you still should be able to tackle. Your linebackers are missing tackles. Your defensive line isn't getting home as much as you like. It's just embarrassing. And I think he's done a great job with this team, and I don't want to see Jim Schwartz go. I really don't. I'm just saying that I think with how bad the offense has been, it's been a really tough ride for that defense to buy in and to want to win because they're always on the field and the offense gives them zero help. And, Myles Garrett's going to come out in press conferences and say, we got to do our job better. We got to help the offense out more. He can say all that stuff. That's not the truth. The defense does their jobs at the beginning of these games. If you look at the Browns in the first quarter, I don't know the stats, but I think they've been pretty good in the first quarter this year, at least defensively. And they've just come out of the gate so slow on offense week after week after week. I mean, talk about the Giants game. You force a fumble on the opening kickoff and score a play on the score a touchdown on the first play from scrimmage, and then I don't think we scored again until the third quarter, and it was a field goal. What? How do you go that? How do you fall into that much of a lull with that much momentum at home? It makes no sense. And it has to be coaching. It just has to be coaching because these players have shown that they can play well previous years, but they can't this year. And we're not coming prepared to play. And like I said earlier, I think there's certain players that need to go. And I'm not saying that it's because they're bad or whatever. It might be even because they're good and you don't want to waste their careers here. Now, I'm not going to say Myles Garrett needs to get traded because you can't trade a player like Myles Garrett. You could probably get a pretty big package for him. You just can't trade a player like that. He's your franchise guy, franchise defensive end, future Hall of Famer. He should be a Brown for life, no doubt. But you can't deny that you're wasting his career. you're wasting a Hall of Fame career on a team that will never be good because this reason or that reason. It's just how it is. It's the same old Cleveland Browns. It really is. Um, Another guy that you really can't trade is Nick Chubb because first of all, nobody's going to trade for a Nick Chubb with a busted knee that who knows how he's going to be. But he's also just so beloved in the city of Cleveland, and it would be really hard for them to get rid of a guy like that. Um, and that's another point just to go back, but like Nick Chubb, whether he's ready to play this year or not, he can't play. I know people want him to play. I don't think you could play Nick Chubb, and I think that would be another bad coaching decision. And I get maybe he wants to come and play, and that's something. But you cannot risk a guy with that much talent, and coming off that big of an injury for a team that will almost assuredly miss the playoffs. It's just not worth it. It's just not. Another guy that you can't trade, and he's been way too good this year. He's been the best player on this team, bar none, maybe besides Myles Garrett, has been Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. The jersey I'm wearing, he's my favorite player on the team. He's probably my favorite player in the NFL. I love JOK. I have his cards sitting on my desk. I collect his football cards. I have a signed jersey. He's my favorite player in the NFL. I love him. However, that me saying he's been the best player on this team is not biased. I swear it's not. He was the only player that came to play today against the Washington Commanders. He forced a fumble, had an interception. He tackled for a loss machine. He's been the best player. He runs sideline to sideline. He's an all-pro linebacker. And we're wasting his career. He just signed a 3-year extension. It's a player you can't trade because he's been so good. And you want him to be a key piece of your rebuild. But plain and simple, we're wasting that potential. And by the time you rebuild the team, you worry that he won't be as fast and as quick as he is today when the team should be as good as it is. Or when the team should be super good. It's just, it sucks. It really does. Players I can definitely see the Browns moving on from at the trade deadline are Amari Cooper for sure. I don't think Amari Cooper will be on this team for much longer. He's not happy on this team. I know fans aren't happy with him. And while he did have a pretty decent week this week, obviously his connection with Deshaun Watson has diminished, even if there ever was one. And it's just a player you have to move on from. You're not tied to him. It's the last year of his contract. He's getting up there in age, and it's just somebody's going to call asking about Amari Cooper at the deadline. A team that's making a playoff run that needs a receiver, and it's a player you just have to get rid of because he's doing nothing sitting on this team. Other players I could see us getting rid of for sure are Greg Newsome, potentially, Martin Emerson, potentially. I think of the two, the better player is Greg Newsome, but I think that's the player that they would get rid of. I like Martin Emerson a lot. I think he's a good player, but he is not having a good year. Plain and simple, he's been really bad in coverage, and he's committing a lot of penalties. He is getting burnt, and he just has not been good. He's been a clear target for opposing quarterbacks. It's just been a tough year for Martin. Another player that I think could also go is that third cornerback, which is Denzel Ward. I think he's probably in that Myles Garrett, Nick Chubb boat where he will try and always be a Brown. But I think if a team comes up with the right price, the Browns would move on from Denzel Ward, and that would mean that they were really blowing things up. The last player on defense I'll mention, Za'Darius Smith. He's old, but a team that is making a playoff push, that is pass rusher needy, I could definitely see calling about Big Z, and I think that would be a good move for another team to make. Maybe you can grab onto a 4th or 5th round pick for the Cleveland Browns, and while you're also just blowing up the team. Moving on to the offense on players you can get rid of. I don't know why anybody would be calling about Browns offensive players because this offense is so terrible. But obviously I said Amari Cooper is a player that will definitely be gone by the deadline, in my opinion. Elijah Moore, now while he hasn't done really anything in the NFL, I definitely think that's a player that maybe a slot needy team will call about, wanting like a quick H-back type player. Maybe. I think that's a player that could get some trade buzz around the deadline. And that's really about it. David Njoku, I don't see getting traded. He's falls into that Myles Garrett, Nick Chubb, and Denzel Ward category where I think he will be probably always be a Brown, and he would be a core piece of your new rebuild that you just don't want to move on from. And then that's about it. Who else would anyone call the Browns about? Nobody on the offensive line. I assure you that. You'd think, okay, well, maybe you trade your left tackle, Jed Wills. If somebody calls about Jed Wills wanting them on their team, they are worse ran than the Cleveland Browns because Jed Wills is terrible. It's not that he doesn't have the talent, and it's not that he can't go out there and play a good left tackle. Jed Wills is a player who marches onto the field and does not try. He does not try, and it is so apparent. He moves slow. It's like he doesn't pay attention. It's like he's not ready for the snap. It's crazy. He's really bad. He's really, really bad. You didn't sign his 5th-year option. He's gone after this year. Thank God, because I can't stand him. He doesn't try. If he was just a revolving door at left tackle and really bad, I would just chalk it up to, okay, he's not a great player, whatever. He doesn't try. That's unacceptable. How could you march a guy out there that you're paying millions of dollars to play probably the second most important position on the offense, and he doesn't try? What is that? How is that possible? It's a joke. And he never has. It's like he doesn't care about anything. And he always hasn't. It's a joke. The offensive line has been so putrid. Jack Conklin has been injured. He came back today. Didn't look good. Your guards are both hurt. Joel Bitonio, who was already having a bad year, got hurt. Now Zach Zinter's in for him, the 3rd-round rookie out of Michigan. He hasn't been great. I mean, he was okay, but he was really bad today. Both centers, Nick Harris and Ethan Pocic, they haven't been good. They've been riddled with injuries and both not very good. It's just a joke. Wyatt Teller's had a really bad year. DeJuan Jones, who was great last year. And again, a lot of this has to do with the loss of Coach Callahan. I get it. That's a loss that is really going to hurt us. And not is going to hurt us, that is hurting us. But at some point, it's like, you just have to go out there and play good. And they're not doing it. And coaching helps with that, obviously. But it's like they forgot how to play their positions. I don't know if the new offensive line coach has installed a whole new thing. I don't know what it is. But they have taken a big derailing from last year, and it's very apparent. DeJuan Jones, I was about to talk about, he was great last year. He was stopping guys like TJ Watt in their tracks. He looked awesome as a rookie. And this year, he looks too heavy. He looks slow. He just has not been good. And I think part of it is coaching. I think part of it is that he needs to lose some weight. And I think part of it is that he needs to decide if he loves football or not, kind of like Jed Wills. That was always a question with him at Ohio State. Does he love football? Because he's a big basketball guy. But does he love football? Does he care enough about learning how to be so good as he can be? I mean, he has the body, he has the frame, he has the mind. It's just, does he care? I think, yes, he does. But I do think he does need to lose a couple pounds to be a little bit quicker on that first step, or else he's going to have to maybe move to guard. But he's too big to play guard. I really don't know. But his first kick out on that right side has just been too slow this year, and he's been too slow, with guys getting around him, and it's made Deshaun suffer heavily. But yeah, that's pretty much about it. The Browns have been very, very bad. We play the Eagles next week in Philadelphia. Mark it in, pencil it in. Another loss. There's no way that we figure it out on the road against a really good Philadelphia team. I get they haven't been great. I mean, they've been fine, but still, we're not going to figure it out against that Philly team. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed to be a Cleveland Browns fan, just like every other year. Go Guardians. I don't know. See ya.